Welcome back to our East Med Forum. We have Captain Lars Wedin from the Maritime Academy. Welcome, Captain Wedin. I understand that you'll be talking to us about maritime strategy for the 21st century.
Correct.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So, good morning. So, I will talk about maritime strategy in general, and I will follow the views I have discussed in my book, which title you see at now, I hope. We will not, however, dwell on Admiral Castex. William, next slide, please. So the first question, of course, is what is maritime strategy? And for a very general definition, you see a maritime strategy has two general callings: to create, favor, and increase the factors constituting maritime power, and to put this power into use in order to achieve political objectives. Of course, this is a definition that could be used for any kind of a strategy except the word maritime. And also you might recognize that the first point there is nearly a quote from Mahan. So the question is then, of course, what is maritime power? Next slide, please. So I hope you see a slide which it's called Maritime Power now. Maritime power, there are of course possible to make many kinds of lists. Of course, first is the general conditions, geographic conditions. Now, Cyprus has better potential for maritime power than Switzerland, for obvious reasons. And geographic conditions, of course, are difficult to change without going to war, which is of course forbidden today. But they are what they are. And economic and financial conditions. To have a navy is very expensive, so you must have money. On the other hand, the output of maritime power is, to a large extent, exactly economic and financial issues, economic and financial benefits. It's about industrial conditions. You must have the ability, the people, know how to conceive, create, construct all the means you need in order to put maritime power to use. Something that is called moral conditions is moral in the sense of fighting moral and not, of course, a sexual moral. It's about that is the issue of having the people of your country understanding the importance of the maritime issues, that they understand the importance of the sea, they support the navy, they support the merchant navy, and so on and so forth. And then the national defense conditions, for instance, what is the situation of a navy within the defense establishment? You have a very joint structure, or you have, which is normally and most often dominated by the army, or does a navy have a say in the conceivement of strategies and so on? And finally, diplomatic conditions. That is the ability of the diplomacy of the state to further the state's maritime interest in international fora, IMO, for instance. But it's also the ability of using the navy for the diplomatic purposes, what's called naval diplomacy. So basically, this is a list of the conditions that support the maritime power. Next slide, please. What the maritime strategy in itself, then it is, as I see it, it depends on it has three sub strategies. One which is called wealth building, and that is With that I mean that's the output of a maritime strategy. It's a question of economy, it's a question of food, it's a question of all the resources and wealth that you can find in the sea. Then you must, as in all strategies, you must have a resources strategy, a strategy in order to construct and conceive of a navy, how it is composed by different kinds of ships. You must be able to have a strategy for how to construct oil platform, gas platforms, and so on and so forth. And finally, then, of course, it's a naval strategy. It's a strategy of action. It has a very broad strategy in my mind. It's peacetime, it's good order at sea, it's the protection of your assets at sea, your interests at sea, it's to further your interests at sea, and so on and so forth. And of course also, which you start to wonder, where is the defense issues? And that is a main point in my thinking about maritime strategy, that is maritime strategy is dual. It's both a kind of a civilian issue and a military issue. Next slide, please. So now you say naval officer cut into half, which is meant to explain the issue of dualism. A naval officer is, of course, an officer in the military sense of the word, but he also is a mariner. A naval officer who commands the ship. He commands the warship, but he also commands the ship with all the legal restrictions and conditions that apply to commanding officer. His ship is, of course, again a war machine of war, but it is also it also has the same physical conditions as any ships: wind, streams, waves, and so on and so forth. And that is this dualism is a main point, in one of the main points of thinking. This dualism tends to be not very much understood by people from the army, for instance, who have difficulties understanding that Navy has important issues also in peacetime. Because then you might ask yourself, and the Coast Guard. Well, it's true that some countries have two navies, like United States, for instance. They have a big Coast Guard and they have a fighting navy. But to my mind, this is a modality. This is a question of how to organize. It's not a question of strategy. The next slide, please. Now you should see a beautiful slide of the sea. And it's astonishing in books about strategy, you very often not speak about the sea. But the sea is the object of the thing. As air is the object of when you fly. Without air, it's difficult to fly. Without the sea, you don't have a need for a navy. And basically, the sea is perhaps one of the most important issues for this century, as we are depleting our resources at land. We move more and more towards the sea. The sea is more and more important. Next slide, please. Globalization, which of course is one of the main trends in our societies today. Even of course there are some adherents to the ideas of protectionism, and globalization is a rather strong force. And globalization is to a large extent a question of what we call maritimization. And maritimization, this is this continuous flow worldwide of people, merchandise, information, and ideas. And the maritimization consists of several issues. Next slide, please. So maritimization is transport, resources, the criminal use of the sea, the climate issues, and of course important on naval forces. And one of you see here, one of the most modern container ships takes about 16,000 EVP, as the boxes on board. Very, very big ship. And the reason, of course, we have maritimization, that is to a large extent the issue of containerization, the issue that you can send goods around the globe very cheap. I'll take one example, because there is also an abuse in this area. There is an island in the west of Sweden where they have a particular kind of stones. And they cut these stones into rather large pieces. They put them in a container and they transport them to China, where it is made into small pieces, which is suitable to use in a garden. And then the stone is going back to the west coast of Sweden. Of course, this doesn't really make sense from a climate point of view, at least, but obviously it just makes sense from an economical point of view because it's so cheap to send it around the world. Next slide, please. So here you see a picture of the major sea lines around the world. And it's interesting, in particular in one point of view, and that's a concentration in the Indian Ocean of all kind of transports. The Indian Ocean is really the hub of the maritime world of today. Next slide, please. Something which we don't tend to forget is that 90 to 95% of all information, for instance, this discussion we have now, tends to go through fiber cables, mostly on the bottom of the sea. They are, of course, vulnerable. There are both the Russians and the Americans have special submarines that can locate such cables and go into them and listen to them. But this is the main venue for information in our world. And of course, that means also that it is vulnerable. It was last year, for instance, a tanker put its anchor outside the coast of Algeria, and Algeria was out of internet for a week. Next slide, please. Resources. When saying resources of the sea, of course, you think about fishing. That's correct. About 1.35 billion people worldwide are dependent on fish for their main protein intake. And of course, we all have these oil and gas platforms around on North Sea, around our coast. Not to talk about wind turbines, whereas I understand Great Britain is the leading nation today. And we have new kinds of power, wave power, current power, for instance. Something which is called as reverse osmosis may be the answer on the lack of drinking water in desert areas. And there is something which is this little fish with medicine is meant to allude to. Well, this is very new, that there's an enormous amount of very interesting things in the water itself. And so for the biochemistry and the pharmaceutical industry finds a lot of very, very interesting substances in the water. And the interesting thing here is that these are compatible with our corpse, because, as you know, we all come once, very long time ago, from the sea. Next slide, please. And of course, we have the criminal use of the sea. This is a map of the drug trade. You can see that it is use of the sea a lot. And the drug trade, I think, is the second, maybe third largest economy in the world. Next slide, please. And then there are kinds of illegal use, the dumping of toxic metals, toxic waste is one. Trafficking, as we all know, pirates, terrorists, and illegal fishing. Illegal fishing is something which is a very big problem, particularly in northwestern Africa. Also the big fishing factories from Russia, Korea, and China comes into the territorial waters of the poor states and take all the fish and destroy the bottoms of the sea, which makes that the fisherman has nothing else to do than get criminals, if I overstate it a bit. This is a very important issue. Something which is very much forgotten comes on the next slide, please. You will always very often hear that the forests, the big forests, are the lungs of the world, but the real lungs of the world is the sea. 50% of the oxygen that you breathe comes from the sea. And the sea plays a very important role in the climate, as the sea absorbs carbon dioxide, it absorbs heat from the air to some extent, of course. With the result that the sea is getting warmer and warmer. And here waste is a big problem. All the plastic pieces that you find in the sea today, which make the photosynthesis, which is the main motor of the oxygen production, is threatened by this problem. And then finally, we come to Naval Forces in the next slide. Traditionally, you talk about command of the sea, or today maybe control of the sea. And this is still an important issue. Until today, the West, in particular the West, have made a lot of intervention, which is called projection of power or projection of forces. But we have been able to do that because we have control of the sea. And if you're in offensive mode, have sea control, you can intercept the communications of the enemy or the adversary, and you can and you can attack his territory from the sea, or in a defensive mode, vice versa. But this is a very small part, of course, of the missions of Naval Forces. Next slide. I used to use these 5 missions in order to describe the naval missions of today. First, in the middle is knowledge and anticipation. That means in the long run, you must learn to know about the sea, how it works, and of course learn about everybody else who is at sea. This is then research, hydrographic research, oceanographic research, and so on. And to the more instant importance, who is where doing what. So this is a kind of a basic mission for everything else. And then they have 4 kinds of missions. The real missions, meaning that you shoot at each other. The virtual, which is a physical issue, the physical arena. The virtual missions, which mainly work on your perceptions, so the perceptions of other states, and you can be defensive and offensive. And the defenses, you have protection. This is a protection of your sea lanes, that's classic. But you also need to protect all this infrastructure that you put into the sea, oil platforms, wind turbines, etc., etc. Deterrence, which of course classically is nuclear deterrence, but doesn't necessarily mean nuclear deterrence. You can deter also, or dissuade is perhaps a better word. You can dissuade other people from doing what they want to do. That's a typical virtual mission because the dissuasion and deterrence works on the perceptions of the other. And you have prevention and intervention. Intervention is clear what that means. Prevention, that is perhaps in the naval arena very often presence. You are present in a certain area in order to keep status quo, while intervention, of course, aims at changing the status quo. So these are the as I see it, the basic 5 missions. Naval forces, they have the very important basis for everything which is naval strategy is the freedom of the seas. I can take next slide, please. This is the way we tend to think about the sea. A free man on a boat navigating on the high seas which belongs to everybody or no one, depending on how you look at it. And this is the issue of the freedom of the seas. That's why naval forces can be present at sea for long times. They can project their influence to regional states, either at sea or ashore, because they can move freely and they can stay at sea outside a country for a very long time if they want to, without asking anyone. However, and this is the last part of my intervention, however, this freedom of the sea is threatened by a number of developments today. Next slide, please. First, we have the infrastructuration of the sea. So the fact that you put more and more infrastructure at sea. This is of course physical obstacles, but they also influence naval operations because they are noisy. The helix of a wind turbine has a very large radar equivalent area. They tend to disturb Doppler radars, the kind of radar that you have in most modern aircraft and so on and so forth. And basically this infrastructure, particularly when you put, like in Great Britain or in France, you put hundreds of wind turbines at sea, you have to get a kind of a new kind of territory, which is neither land nor sea. It's like you put oil on the surface of the sea, which is disperses. So there's a kind of, again, it's a kind of in between land and sea, and the tactical consequences of this is not yet known. But anyway, they are there. They are important. They have to be protected. They have to be avoided, and so on. Next slide, please. And then there we have the issue of the territorialization of the sea. This issue is linked to the infrastructurization, meaning that states who put, some states in particular, who put infrastructure at sea, they want to declare this as a territory. But as you know, there is only a slight, small area at sea which is territory. It's a territorial sea, 12 nautical miles, while everything which is outside belongs to the high seas. And this is the tongue of the ox, which is called, or the beef. That is an area which is claimed by China as blue territory. And there are big 2 problems with this. First, it's not territory, and second, it's not China's. This is economic. A large part of this is composed of exclusive economic zones of the various countries around the South China Sea. China is not the only one who are having these kind of claims. Russia also. And if this is a trend that is very important, and which will, if it continues, reduce, for instance, the freedom of movement of naval forces. That's why the United States is so much against it. Next slide, please. Then we have something rather new. The marine protected areas. More and more areas around the world have particular protection. That means that, for instance, you cannot use sonar, big sonar on a destroyer. You are compelled to reduce speed and so on and so forth. All these areas, they have different rules. Their position is rather weak. They might probably, so the legal position is rather weak, but that will be strengthened probably. I will come back to that. But it's something, and I know that Obama, President of the United States, he has just declared a very, very large marine protected area around Hawaii. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of uses of the sea. We have a number of them on these slides. And they all tend to want to use the sea at the same place. And this is, of course, a problem in congested areas of the Channel, Gibraltar, perhaps the Eastern Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. And then there comes something new, which is called Maritime Spatial Planning, which basically means that you try to cut up the sea and say this one will go here and this one will be there, and so on and so forth. Again, reducing the liberty of movement of naval forces. Of course, you could say, in wartime, naval forces will do what they want, so that's of course sure. In crisis, well, I suppose that Western naval forces will follow all these kinds of rules. I'm not that sure that this goes for other countries like, well, Russia, China, so on. And now, as we speak, there is a new conference in the context of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and this what you read here: advancing conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Of course, it's not me that has invented this formula. It's a UN formula for the new negotiations. There are pre-negotiations now, and it is believed that the main negotiations for a new annex on to UNCLOS will be agreed somewhere towards 2020. What it is about is the water itself. You have the economic zones basically for what's on the surface. You have the seabed, what's on the bottom of the sea. But this will discuss who owns as all those things, all those resources that you find in the sea, and also this is an issue of environment protection, of course. So it is believed that this negotiation might further limit the liberty of movement of sea, both for naval ships and for merchant ships, and the result we will see in due time. But this is a very, very important negotiation for all maritime states like Cyprus and Great Britain. So next and the last slide. So that's the end of my intervention, and maybe the beginning of a question. I don't know if there is time for that. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, in July of this year, there was a ruling in the Tribunal of UNCLOS against China in the South China Sea dispute.
Yes.
Is there any way that international institutions can enforce judgments?
Well, as I am, that this is very difficult if you are not going to agree on sanctions, for instance. As China has won the P5, that is highly unlikely. So no, I don't. You can of course have use political and diplomatic pressure and so on, but this is this issue of the blue territory is very much in the heart of Chinese policy. They claim that UNCLOS is not important. This is blue territory by heritage, thanks to history, and that's that. And how to make them change their minds, difficult. And of course, one difficulty here is that the main protector of the liberty at sea, United States, is not part of United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and I suppose that Mr. Trump will not change that policy.
But it does give a problem, does it not? That if we have institutions that are basically ignored, then once China has done it, then everybody can do it.
Exactly. And that's why it is. Why the heading of that slide is not China, it's the trend of territorialization of the sea. Yeah. So I say, yes, it is a trend.
Okay.
You have Russia who claims a large part of the Arctic Sea, for instance.
Well, it's part of an overall context which concerns me. The ICJ have said they are very concerned about enforcing their judgments, and of course the ICC has just had many nations derogate from it, including, I think it was last week, Russia. And so the international institutions themselves are losing their credibility and losing their ability to enforce international law.
Yes, and well, the result will then probably more confrontations, more conflicts, and which is good for naval officers. There will be more need for naval forces, but from a human point of view in general, that's of course a very, very bad thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that.
Lars, thank you very much for fascinating and an interesting way that you view it and analyze it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.